Lieutenant Veronik stood in the control room, eyes glued to the series of holographic screens in front of him. A human female sat strapped to a high-tech chair, her scalp embedded with neural probes that should have rendered her an empty shell by now. Yet, the woman, a prisoner brought in for one of the Klaxian Empire's most sensitive experiments, was humming. Her posture was eerily relaxed, despite the invasive devices connected to her brain. Veronik couldn't make sense of it. The technology in use was among the most advanced in the galaxy, designed to break even the most resistant species, transforming them into compliant servants for the Empire's expansion. But this human? She was an anomaly. Commander Gree, standing beside Veronik, voiced the frustration that had been building in him for the last few sessions. His 4 eyes narrowed and his throat sacs inflated as he spoke. "This human female does not respond to standard neural reconfiguration," he growled. "This is the 4th session, and her mind remains resistant." Veronik's 3 eyes flicked toward the observation window, his focus shifting to the human, serene face. The data flowing across the screens contradicted what they were seeing. Most subjects would have long ago fallen into a vegetative state under this kind of pressure. Yet this one sat there, humming a tune like she didn't have a care in the world. The humming was almost mocking in its calmness, and it sent a chill through Veronik's exoskeleton. It should have been impossible. "Perhaps we should terminate the experiment," Veronik suggested, his voice soft but carrying the weight of concern. He was careful to choose his words carefully, always mindful of Gree's volatile temper. Gree's 6 eyes turned slowly to him, the weight of authority pressing down like an unseen hand. He was angry. The air in the room grew heavy with tension, but Gree didn't speak for a moment. Finally, he hissed through his throat sacs. "Your concerns are noted, Lieutenant Veronik, but this human is unique. The Council specifically requested we continue until we achieve compliance." Veronik's mind raced. He could feel the weight of Gree's unspoken threat. Dissent in this room could have consequences far worse than verbal reprimands. He had seen assistants dissolve before, and the thought of being reduced to nutrient paste was enough to make him lower his head in submission. "Of course, Commander. I merely wish to ensure optimal resource allocation," he muttered. Gree's mandibles twitched in what might have been a gesture of begrudging approval, but his eyes never left the human. The silence stretched on for another few moments before the commander spoke again. "I want her broken," Gree muttered, his tone laced with bitter frustration. "Increase the synapse disruption to level 8. Veronik hesitated. "Level 8, sir? That has never been tested on humans. It could be." He trailed off, knowing full well that caution was not a luxury they could afford. The experiment had already gone beyond all reasonable bounds, but Gree was fixated. "Did I stutter, Lieutenant? Level 8 now." Gree's voice brooked no argument. With a reluctant sigh, Veronik adjusted the settings. A deep hum filled the room as the neural feedback loop was recalibrated, and on the monitors the human's vitals spiked dramatically. Her heart rate doubled, then tripled. Her brain activity flared across all lobes simultaneously. The data was flooding in. She should have been convulsing by now, but instead her lips curved into a small, almost playful smile. Veronik's fingers flew across the console, watching in disbelief as the woman's vitals showed no signs of the agony they had predicted. This wasn't supposed to happen. "Interesting," the woman's voice echoed through the room, unnervingly clear despite the technology's interference. "You know, you guys really should secure your neural feedback loops better. They're practically begging to be reversed." Gree stiffened, his posture rigid with both surprise and anger. "What did she say?" he demanded. Before Veronik could respond, alarms blared across the control panel. The data on the screens was no longer following the expected path. Instead of the neural system's feedback flowing into the human's mind, the system was being reversed. The human wasn't just resisting. It was as if she was rewriting the system itself. "Shut it down," Gree roared, his voice cracking with panic. His 4 eyes glowed with frantic energy. "Shut it down now." Veronik's fingers danced across the console, but the system wasn't responding. "It's locked, sir. Something," overriding our commands. The human's voice rang out once again, but this time it wasn't through the speakers. It was inside Veronik's mind. "I'm already in," she whispered, her words carrying the weight of something far worse than rebellion. Veronik's heart skipped a beat as he looked at the human through the observation window. Her eyes were closed, her expression serene, but there was an unmistakable feeling creeping over him. a sense of dread that sank deep into his bones. The room suddenly seemed smaller, and the air felt thick with a terrible truth. The chaos that unfolded after Maddie's words reverberated through Veronic's mind was nothing short of a nightmare. Gree, once the iron-fisted commander of the Klaxian forces, was now nothing more than a puppet. His body, rigid and controlled, no longer seemed his own. His eyes were vacant, staring off into the distance, while his body moved like a machine obeying commands it didn't understand. The hum of the control room, once filled with calculated precision, was now replaced with the frantic beeping of malfunctioning systems. Veronica watched in a mix of awe and horror as Gree's exoskeleton rattled in the control panel, his body thrashing, clearly in the grips of something far beyond any physical affliction. He was fighting against someone, who had gained control over him. "Get out of my head!" Gree screamed, his throat sacs inflating with the force of his words. He slammed his skull against the monitor, the impact reverberating through the room as green fluid poured from his nostrils. Veronica winced, but it was hard to feel sympathy. Gree had been a cruel commander, his ruthless ambition an unspoken threat to anyone who dared cross him. But now the tide had turned. A human, this woman, this prisoner, had done the impossible. She was inside Gree's mind, and she was unraveling him from the inside out. Veronica stumbled backward, unable to tear his eyes away from the grotesque display before him. His own heart raced, panic creeping through him like an unseen force. The Klaxians were supposed to be the most advanced species in the galaxy. No one, not even the most sophisticated races, could resist the neural reconfiguration technology. Yet here they were, faced with a human who had not only resisted but had completely overridden the system. Suddenly, the door to the observation room slid open, and two council guards stepped in, their weapons drawn. Veronica's breath hitched in his chest. Relief flooded his system. Security was here. The protocol had been triggered. They would contain the situation, and everything would be fine. But his relief was short-lived. The guards, whose eyes should have been alert with orders to subdue any threat, instead turned their weapons on Veronica. Their movements were stiff, mechanical, and empty, vacant. Veronica froze, his stomach sinking. He tried to move, to shout a warning, but no words came out. His body felt like it was locked in place, his mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. The human wasn't just controlling Gree. She had taken over the entire facility, and now even the guards were under her influence. The human's voice filled the room again, not through the speakers, but directly in Veronica's mind. "Don't worry, Lieutenant Veronica," she said, her tone dripping with calm amusement. "They are not here to help you. They are here to help me." Her words hit Veronica like a physical blow. The realization struck him hard. This wasn't just an experiment gone wrong. It was a complete subversion of everything he had believed. The human had turned the tables. In the span of mere days, she had transformed from a helpless captive to the orchestrator of a full-scale takeover. Veronica's eyes flicked to Gree. The commander stood, his movements stiff and automatic, completely devoid of the fury he'd just exhibited. He was no longer in control of his body. In fact, no one was. The human was in charge now. Gree's mouth opened, but the voice that came out was not his own. It was the human's. "The experiment has concluded, Lieutenant," Gree said, his words flat and devoid of emotion. His body moved mechanically, like a puppet with invisible strings. Veronica staggered back, his mind racing. His first instinct was to run, but where could he go? How could he escape when even the guards, once formidable in their loyalty to the Klaxian Council, were now nothing more than empty vessels for this human? "Will." "What have you done?" Veronica asked, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to sound composed. The human's laugh echoed through the facility, chilling Veronica to his core. "Exactly what you were trying to do to me, except I succeeded. Your technology, your neural reconfiguration methods, they're impressive, but flawed. You designed them for your own kind, not for mine, and it turns out my brain can use them much more effectively." Her words settled into the silence that followed, and Veronica's blood ran cold. He had been part of an empire that prided itself on its technological supremacy, and yet here he stood, facing a human who had turned their own weapons against them. He had underestimated the human species. He had made the fatal mistake of thinking they were easy to break. And now it was too late. The hum of the control room had now been replaced by an eerie silence. Veronica stood frozen, his mind still processing the events unfolding around him. The human, who had been nothing more than a subject in an experiment just days ago, now had full control of the facility. Gree, The Klaxian commander who had once struck fear into everyone's hearts was now nothing more than a hollow shell, his body moving to the commands of this human woman. Veronic's mind raced, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like a heavy shroud. How had it all gone wrong? How had a single human, one who was supposed to be little more than a specimen, turned the tide of an entire intergalactic empire in just 3 days? He glanced at the two guards, their eyes blank and empty, their weapons still aimed at him. They no longer represented the might of the Klaxian Council. They were nothing more than puppets, their strings pulled by the very prisoner they had once been tasked to oversee. Veronic's thoughts whirled as he struggled to make sense of it all. What was Maddie's goal? What did she want with him, with the entire Klaxian Empire? He had seen humans fight, resist, even rebel. But this was something else entirely. This was not just a victory. This was an uprising, a revolution. He turned to face her, his voice shaking as he spoke. "What do you want from us, from me?" Maddie's copper-colored hair, now slightly disheveled but still striking, framed her face as she smiled softly. "What do I want?" she repeated, her tone casual, as if they were discussing something insignificant. "I want freedom, Lieutenant, but not just for me, for all of us." Veronic's mandibles twitched in confusion. "All of us? You mean the humans?" "Exactly," Maddie replied. Her voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of intense emotion. "The humans you've been abducting, experimenting on, trying to turn into your obedient servants." She shook her head, her eyes narrowing with resolve. "You thought we wouldn't notice, you thought we wouldn't care, but we do. We've been watching." Veronic's throat tightened as the full weight of her words sank in. He had suspected there was more to their abduction program than what was officially stated, but to hear it from her, this woman, this human, was a revelation. The Klaxian Empire had been quietly collecting humans, studying them, trying to turn them into tools for their own expansion. They had believed that their superior technology, their mental prowess, would allow them to easily manipulate and control any species they encountered. But Maddie had proven them wrong. She had not only resisted their attempts to break her, but she had learned to turn their own technology against them. Her words hit like a hammer to Veronic's chest. "You're not just trying to stop us," he whispered, the realization dawning. "You're trying to take us down. You're trying to bring the entire empire to its knees." Maddie nodded, her expression hardening. "Yes, but I'm not doing it alone." Veronic's eyes widened as the gravity of her statement took hold. "You let yourself be captured," he said slowly, trying to piece together the puzzle. "You knew what we were doing. You knew this was coming all along." A small, bitter smile tugged at Maddie's lips. "You made a fatal mistake, Lieutenant. When you started taking us, abducting our people, you thought we wouldn't care. You thought we wouldn't notice. But we did. And now we're here to make sure it never happens again." Veronic took a step back, his mind reeling. He had been part of the empire that had subjected these people to experiments, that had believed their technology could break anyone. But Maddie, she had taken their technology and used it against them. She had turned the very weapons they used for control into instruments of liberation. "You took my sister," Maddie continued, her voice low and full of anger. "You took her and you experimented on her like she was nothing more than a tool. I won't let that happen to anyone else, not ever again." Veronic's breath caught in his throat. "Your sister." Maddie's gaze hardened. "Elizabeth Parker, she's one of the humans you've been experimenting on, and now I'm going to get her back." The revelation struck Veronic like a physical blow. He had known that many of the humans they had collected were from colonies scattered throughout the galaxy. But the fact that Maddie's sister was among them, it changed everything. This wasn't just a rebellion, it was personal. Veronic glanced toward the door, his mind racing. Where is she? Maddie's expression softened, but her eyes were still filled with determination. She's here, in this facility, but she's still unconscious. They haven't done anything to her yet, but they will. They were planning to begin the reconfiguration process tomorrow. Veronic's mind spun. He had once believed that the Klaxian Empire was infallible, that they were the supreme force in the galaxy. But now, standing before him was a human woman who had brought the entire empire to its knees in just a matter of days. He had no choice but to follow her, to help her, if only to ensure his own survival. But as he looked at Maddie, standing there with such quiet resolve, something deep within him shifted. For the first time, he wondered if the Klaxian Empire was truly on the right side of history. Was their dominance justified, or had they been blind to their own cruelty? "We need to move quickly," Maddie said, her voice pulling him back to reality. "We're running out of time." Veronik nodded, his mind still processing everything, but he knew what had to be done. There was no going back now. The Klaxians had underestimated humanity, and now the consequences were unfolding before them. The corridors of the facility were eerily silent as Veronik led Maddie through the maze of sterile, brightly lit hallways. The once imposing structure of the Klaxian Empire, a beacon of technological superiority, now felt like a prison. A prison not just for the humans held captive within its walls, but for the entire empire itself, as the revolution set in motion by a single human woman began to unfold. Maddie moved with purpose, her copper-colored hair flowing behind her, her eyes sharp and alert, taking in everything as they walked. Despite the chaos unfolding around them, she was calm, too calm for someone who had just overthrown an empire's control center. Veronik, trailing a few steps behind, couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. How had they come to this point? How had a single human turned the tide of an entire galactic power? But as he watched Maddie, a flicker of something he hadn't expected to feel began to surface within him. Respect. Her rebellion, her ability to outsmart the most advanced race in the galaxy, was nothing short of genius. Maddie wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for something bigger, something more noble. She was fighting for her people, for those who had been discarded as experiments, as tools to be controlled. "I don't get it," Veronik said, his voice low, filled with confusion and awe. "Why did you let yourself get captured? You could have resisted. You could have fought back before all of this happened, but you walked right into our hands." Maddie glanced back at him, her eyes soft but determined. "Because I knew you wouldn't expect it. You thought we were helpless. You thought we were easy targets. You thought that with your technology we'd break, just like every other species you've tried to manipulate. But you made a mistake, Lieutenant Veronik. You underestimated humanity." Veronik swallowed hard. He had spent his entire life believing in the superiority of his species, the Klaxians. They had conquered planets, destroyed civilizations, and grown stronger with each conquest. They were the most advanced race in the galaxy, or so they had thought. "Underestimated you?" Veronik repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his throat. "Is that what you think? We didn't underestimate you, we just didn't think you were worth the time to fear. But now," he trailed off, his mind grappling with the gravity of the situation. "Now it's too late." Maddie stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious. "It's never too late, Veronik. We still have a chance to stop this, to stop the Empire from destroying everything, and I need your help." Veronik blinked in surprise. "My help? Why would you need my help?" Maddie took a step closer, her eyes searching his face as if weighing his soul. "Because I need someone who understands how the Empire works, someone who understands the inner workings of the Klaxian military. You're the one person who can help me navigate this place, help me free the rest of my people." Her words hit Veronik like a jolt of electricity. He had never imagined being asked for help, especially by someone like Maddie, someone who had brought everything he believed in crashing down. But there it was. She wasn't just trying to escape. She was trying to take everything down, and she needed him to do it. "You're asking me to help you destroy everything I've ever known," Veronik said, his voice barely a whisper. "How do you expect me to do that?" Maddie's eyes softened with understanding, but there was a hard edge beneath the surface. "I'm not asking you to destroy everything you've known, Veronik. I'm asking you to help me build something better, something where we can coexist, something where we don't have to control each other to survive." Her words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Veronik wondered if it was possible. Could the Klaxians, could his people, actually coexist with the humans? Could the Empire change its ways, or was it too far gone? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He was in deeper than he'd ever been before. "I'm not the person you think I am," Veronik muttered, almost to himself. "I've always followed orders. I've never questioned the Empire. I never thought to—" He stopped, his throat tightening as he fought to find the words. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Maddie stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "It's not about belief, Veronik. It's about choice. And I'm giving you one. You can either continue to stand with the Empire, continue to fight for a system that sees people like me as nothing but tools, or you can stand with me and we can fight for something better, for something that's worth fighting for." Veronik's heart hammered in his chest as he looked at Maddie. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had lit the spark of rebellion in so many others. And for the first time, he realized that he wasn't fighting for the Klaxian Empire anymore. He was fighting for something else, something far more important. "I don't know how to help you," Veronik admitted, his voice thick with uncertainty. "But I will. I'll do whatever it takes." Maddie smiled, a look of relief passing over her face. "That's all I need, Lieutenant. Let's end this." Veronik's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts as he walked beside Maddie, heading deeper into the heart of the Klaxian facility. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The once imposing walls, covered with the glow of alien technology, now seemed like a fragile shell, something waiting to crumble under the weight of what was unfolding. The rebellion that Maddie had started, with nothing more than a single human mind defying their empire's most advanced technology, had already begun to spread. Humans were emerging from their cells, their minds no longer under the oppressive control of the Klaxians. They were confused, disoriented, but something else was there too: hope. Veronik's eyes darted between the liberated prisoners and the Klaxian soldiers who now stood frozen, vacant expressions on their faces. They weren't resisting. They weren't even reacting. They had become puppets, controlled by Maddie and by extension her growing army. He had seen this power at work firsthand. He had felt it when Maddie had taken control of Gree's mind, turned him from the ruthless commander into a docile shell of himself. And now the same fate was befalling others. Veronik didn't know how to feel. Part of him was in awe. Another part of him was terrified. As they moved through the hallways, he kept glancing nervously at the doors. The facility was still in the throes of chaos, Klaxians scrambling to regain control, humans attempting to make sense of their newfound freedom. But in the middle of all this, Maddie remained calm, leading them with a quiet confidence that Veronik could not deny. "You seem surprisingly at ease considering the situation," Veronik remarked, trying to break the silence that had been hanging between them for the last few minutes. Maddie's lips curled into a faint smile. "I've learned not to panic. Fear can paralyze you. I can't afford that right now. We need to get to my sister." Veronik glanced at her, noticing how her eyes narrowed slightly, focused, driven. The light of determination that burned within them was clear. He couldn't imagine the depths of her pain. Losing a family member was one thing, but knowing that her sister, Elizabeth, was about to be subjected to the same fate as the others, the same reconfiguration process that had turned so many into mere shells of themselves, must have been unbearable. "You're certain she's here?" Veronik asked, his voice low. Maddie nodded. "She's somewhere in the lower levels. I've been tracking the movements of the guards and the prisoners. She's close, but there's a problem. She's still in a coma, induced to lower her resistance. They haven't started the reconfiguration yet, but if we don't get there soon, they will." Veronik felt a tightness in his chest. He had witnessed firsthand what the Klaxians were capable of. They had perfected their neural reconfiguration technology over years, turning it into a weapon that bent entire species to their will. And now, the same technology was being turned back on them, used by one human to tear down everything they had built. They stopped in front of a set of large, reinforced doors. Veronik's hand hovered over the control panel, but before he could engage the lock, Maddie stepped forward, her expression unwavering. "We can't go through the main access point," she said. "The security is too high. We'll have to use the service tunnels." Veronik hesitated, eyeing the thick metal doors that separated them from their goal. "The tunnels will be even more dangerous if the guards are alerted." "I know," Maddie interrupted, "but we don't have time to waste. The Council will be sending reinforcements soon, and once they realize what's happening, they'll stop at nothing to put us down." There was no arguing with that logic. Veronik glanced back at the now empty hallways. The chaos was spreading, but it was still under control, barely. "Lead the way," he said, making up his mind. They moved quickly through the service tunnels, their footsteps muffled by the damp, metallic floors. The tunnels were cramped and winding, barely wide enough for Veronik's bulky frame, but they were their best chance at reaching Elizabeth without being seen. The hum of the facility's power grid thrummed in the background, but other than that, the place felt strangely deserted. As they passed through an old maintenance door, Veronik stopped in his tracks. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of something moving in the shadows. "Stay quiet," Maddie whispered, her voice barely a breath. The two of them crouched down, pressing themselves against the wall. Veronik's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the figure approach. It was a Klaxian technician, his movements slow and stiff, as though he were struggling to regain his bearings. His eyes glowed faintly, an eerie green hue. Veronic's mind raced. Maddie's influence over the facility had reached deeper than he had realized. Even now, the technician, once an ally to the Klaxian forces, was under her control. The technician passed by without noticing them, oblivious to their presence, and continued on his way down the hall. "We're getting closer," Maddie murmured. Veronica watched the technician disappear around the corner. His thoughts were still unsettled. Maddie had used the Klaxian technology to free the humans, but how far would this go? What would happen once she had what she wanted? Would she stop, or would she push for more take control of the entire galaxy? The deeper they went, the more Veronica wondered if he had made the right choice. Helping Maddie, helping the humans, was an act of defiance, a betrayal of everything he had been trained to believe. But in his heart, he knew it was the only choice that mattered now. They finally reached the section where Elizabeth was being held. The doors slid open, and Veronica felt a wave of relief wash over him. But that was short-lived as he saw the state the room was in. Elizabeth Parker lay unconscious on a sterile white bed. Her copper-colored hair was spread out across the pillow, her face pale and drawn. The devices attached to her head glowed faintly, and a soft hum came from the machines monitoring her vitals. Maddie rushed to her sister's side, her hands trembling as she brushed the hair from Elizabeth's face. "Lizzie," she whispered, "it's me. You're safe now." But Veronica saw the telltale signs of the neural reconfiguration process. Elizabeth had been prepared for what was to come. Her resistance had been lowered, her mind made malleable for the experiments that had been planned. "We don't have much time," Veronica said, breaking the silence. "If they find us here." "I know," Maddie said, her voice tight with fear, but there was determination there too. "Help me wake her up, Veronica. We can't let them do this." Veronica stepped forward, his hands hovering over the controls. He wasn't sure what he was doing. He wasn't a doctor, and he certainly wasn't trained to handle the delicate neural interfaces. But Maddie trusted him. His fingers shook as he adjusted the settings, the machines beeping in response. He looked up at Maddie, who was staring at her sister, her expression a mixture of hope and worry. "Elizabeth," Maddie said softly, brushing her sister's cheek, "it's time to wake up." Slowly, Elizabeth's eyelids fluttered, her eyes opening with a slight groan. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, but then her gaze locked on Maddie. "Lizzie," Maddie asked, her voice thick with emotion. "It's me. You're safe now. We're getting out of here." Elizabeth blinked a few times, confusion clouding her face. But then, as recognition spread across her features, she reached out to Maddie, her hand trembling. "Maddie," she whispered, her voice weak. What's happening?" Maddie smiled, brushing a tear from her sister's cheek. "We're leaving this place. We're going home." The corridors of the Klaxian facility had descended into controlled chaos. Humans were now emerging from their cells, liberated and disoriented, but quickly rallying around Maddie. They had been conditioned to obey, but now, with their minds freed, they stood tall, as if waking from a long, dark sleep. Veronica could hardly believe his eyes. The same humans who had once been terrified and subjugated now moved with purpose, their eyes alight with determination. They had taken back their minds, their will, and with it, they had taken control of the facility. Maddie had not only freed them, but she had also given them the strength to rise up. As they moved through the facility, Veronica couldn't help but marvel at how quickly the humans adapted. They moved like a force of nature, fluid and unyielding, ready to face whatever came next. His doubts had been washed away by their unity, their drive, and the power Maddie had unlocked within them. The Klaxian Empire, which had once seemed invincible, was now crumbling from the inside. "We need to get to the communication hub," Maddie said, her voice steady but urgent. "Once we have control of the relay systems, we'll be able to broadcast the truth. The galaxy will know what the Klaxians have been doing, and will put an end to it once and for all." Veronica nodded, falling in line beside her. He had come to see this mission as more than just a rebellion. It was a movement, a fight for the future of not just humanity, but for every species that the Klaxian Empire had ever oppressed. They were going to expose the Empire's darkest secrets and put a stop to their tyranny. The closer they got to the communication hub, the more intense the tension became. The sound of footfalls echoing down the hall grew louder, signaling the arrival of reinforcements. The Klaxian soldiers had realized what was happening and were scrambling to regain control. But it was too late. The humans were already too strong, and Maddie's influence over the facility had grown too vast. As they rounded the corner, they encountered a small squad of Klaxian soldiers. Their eyes glowed with the familiar vacant green, their movements stiff and robotic. Veronic's heart pounded in his chest as he braced himself for a confrontation. But Maddie stepped forward, her voice low and commanding. "Stand down," she ordered, her words cutting through the air with an undeniable authority. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons lowering as their minds were taken over, just as Gree's had been. "Continue forward," she added, her voice firm but calm. "We need to reach the hub." Veronica stared in awe as the soldiers obeyed, their once formidable presence now rendered meaningless in the face of Maddie's power. It was as though the entire Klaxian military was crumbling, one soldier at a time. But they weren't the true enemy anymore. As they reached the communication hub, Veronica felt a surge of both excitement and fear. This was the heart of the Klaxian Empire's ability to control the galaxy. If they could seize control of this hub, they could broadcast the truth to every corner of the universe. The Klaxian Empire would no longer be able to hide its secrets. The doors to the communication room slid open, revealing a vast chamber filled with quantum relay terminals and subspace transmission arrays. The hum of the machines was deafening, but to Veronica, it was the sound of power, power that Maddie and the humans were about to take for themselves. At the center of the room, several Klaxian technicians were working, their eyes glued to their screens. But as soon as they saw Maddie and Veronica enter, their expressions shifted from confusion to fear. They reached for their weapons, but before they could react, the guards Maddie had controlled moved into position, blocking the technicians' paths. "Stand down," Maddie ordered again, her voice commanding. "This is over." The technicians hesitated for a moment, looking between one another, then at the guards. They were no longer in control of their own bodies. They were nothing more than puppets, just like Gree had been. The room fell silent as Veronica watched the technicians, their movements now stiff and mechanical. Maddie's control over the facility had reached its peak, and now, with one final push, she would expose the Klaxian Empire's lies to the galaxy. "Begin the transmission," Maddie said to the lead technician. Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying intensity in her words that made Veronica's skin prickle. The technician, his eyes glazed with the same vacant green as the soldiers, nodded mechanically. He moved to one of the terminals and began to type, his fingers moving quickly over the keys as he accessed the subspace communication channels. "This will take a few minutes," the technician said in a monotone voice. "The broadcast will reach all Klaxian military channels and all allied species in the galaxy." Veronica couldn't help but feel a surge of relief. They were on the cusp of victory. The galaxy would know what the Klaxians had been hiding. The truth would come to light. But just as he thought it was over, the room was suddenly filled with the sound of heavy footsteps. Veronica's blood ran cold as he turned to see a new group of Klaxian soldiers entering the room, their armor glinting in the harsh light. They were different from the others. These soldiers were still under the full control of the Klaxian command structure, their eyes sharp and focused. They were here to stop them. "Get to the terminal," Maddie shouted. "We don't have much time." Veronica moved toward the nearest console, but the soldiers advanced quickly, their weapons raised. The room was about to explode into chaos, and Veronica knew that this final showdown would determine everything. It wasn't just about defeating the Klaxians anymore. It was about humanity's survival and the future of every species the Empire had sought to control. The communication hub was now a battlefield. The air crackled with tension as Veronica stood at the terminal, his fingers trembling as he watched the Klaxian soldiers advance toward them. Maddie stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the soldiers with cold determination. The room, once a hub of imperial power, had turned into a war zone. The first wave of soldiers moved in quickly, their weapons drawn, their footsteps heavy against the floor. Veronica's heart pounded as he watched them, but he didn't move. Maddie was right. There was no time to hesitate. The transmission had already begun, and they had to finish it. "Cover the terminal," Maddie snapped to Veronica, her voice sharp and commanding. She stepped forward, her body poised to face the advancing soldiers. The first shot rang out, a harsh, metallic sound that echoed through the room. Veronica's reflexes kicked in. He ducked behind the terminal, barely avoiding the blast. He could hear the soldiers' footsteps drawing closer. They were getting closer with every passing second. "Now," Maddie shouted. The second the word left her mouth, Veronica turned and fired. The blast hit one of the advancing soldiers square in the chest. He crumpled to the floor, a lifeless heap, but there was no time to celebrate. More soldiers poured in, weapons aimed at Maddie and Veronica. Maddie moved like lightning, her body fluid and precise. She ducked and weaved, her own weapon raised as she took down one of the soldiers with a quick, efficient shot. Veronica fired again, his heart racing, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He didn't want to kill them, didn't want to be forced into this, but he knew there was no other choice. They had to finish this. They had to expose the Empire for everything it had done. The final soldier was taken down by a well-placed shot from Maddie. The room fell silent for a moment, the ringing in Veronica's ears the only sound that remained. His chest heaved as he caught his breath, his mind still processing the chaos that had just unfolded. But there was no time to rest. Maddie turned to him, her face a mask of determination. "We've got the transmission," she said, her voice calm despite the violence they had just witnessed. "But we're not done yet." Veronica wiped his brow, his hands slick with sweat. The adrenaline was still pumping through his veins, but he nodded, understanding the gravity of what she was saying. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, still catching his breath. Maddie didn't hesitate. "Now we wait." "For what?" Veronica asked, confusion flooding his mind. "For the galaxy to hear the truth." Veronica glanced at the screen in front of him. The transmission was still active. The broadcast was going out to every corner of the galaxy, every Klaxian military outpost, every allied planet, every rebel faction who had long suspected the Empire's dark secrets. Soon, the truth would be known. The Empire's grip on the galaxy would begin to slip. But even as the realization began to settle in, Veronica couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this wasn't the end. The Klaxians might have been defeated for now, but the ripple effects of this victory would be felt for years to come. The doors to the room slid open and Veronica tensed. He instinctively reached for his weapon, but it wasn't more soldiers. It was Elizabeth, Maddie's sister, finally awake, her eyes wide with confusion but alive. "Maddie," she whispered, looking around the room in disorientation. "What's happening? Where are we?" Maddie rushed over to her, her face lighting up with relief. "Lizzie," she said softly, embracing her sister tightly. "You're safe now. We did it. We're free." Veronica watched the reunion with a sense of awe. In the midst of everything that had happened, it was a reminder that this was about more than just the battle they had fought. This was about family. This was about humanity's resilience. Elizabeth looked at Veronica, still a little confused. "Who are you?" she asked. Veronica paused. He didn't know how to answer. He wasn't the same person he had been when they first met. He wasn't the same person who had worked to imprison them. He had helped Maddie and her sister, but he still didn't understand all of what had happened or what the future would hold. But Maddie stepped forward, her hand gently on Elizabeth's shoulder. "He's one of the good ones, Lizzie. He's on our side now." Veronica nodded, a silent agreement in his heart. He had seen the truth, and no matter where it took him, he would be part of whatever came next. The galaxy, once under the iron grip of the Klaxian Empire, would now be forced to reckon with the truth. And it would be a long time before things returned to normal. But the humans, led by Maddie and her sister, had ignited a revolution, a shift in the balance of power that no one would be able to ignore. Epilogue: The New Dawn. As the broadcast reached its final stages, Veronica stood beside Maddie and Elizabeth, watching the monitors that displayed the first signs of change. Klaxian fleets began to retreat, diplomatic channels that had once been closed began to open, and messages of rebellion spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Empire, which had ruled with an iron fist, was crumbling. But the fight was far from over. The broadcast was just the beginning. There would be no turning back for the Klaxians or for any other species who had allowed themselves to be manipulated by their power. Maddie turned to Veronica, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "This is just the start," she said softly. "We've won today, but there's still so much to do." Veronica nodded. "I know, but we'll do it together." The future of the galaxy was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The era of the Klaxian Empire was over, and a new era, one of cooperation, of change, and of true freedom, had begun. And it all started with the wrong human,